In just 58 minutes, Eala defeats Coco Gauff, and the crowd goes crazy. No one anticipated it. Not Gauff herself, not the supporters, nor the commentators. The energy was different from the first serve. Electric, colder, and sharper. Eala was conveying a message in addition to playing tennis. Every reply was met with fire, and every shot sliced through the air like a blade. Gauff's confidence gradually eroded as her rhythm broke. With each rally, the throng increased, their incredulity rising into a shout. And silence gave way to commotion when the last ball crossed the finish line. The past had just been altered. Beneath that 58-minute masterpiece, however, is an unexpected tale of rivalry, pressure, and covert retaliation. Because sometimes the goal of dominance is to disprove everyone rather than to gain power. There was silence prior to the eruption. Just before the game started, there was an odd, unsettling silence throughout the arena. Silence that seems to be a warning. Everyone was familiar with Coco Gauff, the world-conquering young prodigy who effortlessly carried the burden of expectations. A Grand Slam winner, a representation of the sport's future. And on the other side of the internet stood Alex Eala, who was calm, collected, unknown to some, and undervalued by many. She did not make headlines. She wasn't the most popular. However, she was the unanticipated storm. Eala had been quietly constructing something for months. She spent late nights watching match tapes, endured long sessions in the sweltering sun, and overcame moments of doubt. She was born in the Philippines, where tennis is a passion rather than a promise. Where every failure feels personal and every success feels like revolt. Eala had been informed from the start that players from her region of the world don't succeed. Too small a stage, too far away, too few resources. However, she didn't want to rise to the top and disprove them. She felt she belonged there, which is why she wanted it. She now stood opposite from the lady who represented everything she was told she couldn't be on this court in the dazzling lights. Coco Gauff is a warrior on the court, the face of contemporary tennis, the audience favorite, and the sweetheart of endorsements. It was not meant to be a close game. One-sided betting lines were used. A simple victory was predicted by commentators. However, Eala had a quiet type of rage in her eyes when she moved to the baseline for her warm-up. She wasn't present to take part. She was there to assume control. Her coach murmured something that only she could hear in the corner of her team. Ignore her identity. Recall your identity. It was more than just counsel. Ignition was the cause. As they waited for Gauff's trademark enthusiasm to illuminate the court, the audience muttered restlessly. The cameras flashed. Reporters jotted down notes. However, Eala's first serve cracked like thunder because it was quick, clean, and exactly on the edge. Even Gauff appeared a little taken aback. Nobody was ready to believe the story that was revealed in that first game. Eala was not responding to Gauff's cadence. It was dictated by her. Every step was planned, and every rally was measured. And the tension started to change in a matter of minutes. The audience, accustomed to applauding Gauff's supremacy, began to notice something strange. Uncertainty. Experienced admirers recognized the expression in Eala's eyes. Not nerves, not haughtiness, just such unadulterated concentration that it appeared nearly icy. The narrative of every instance in which she had been disregarded and every competition she had participated in under false identity was contained inside that concentration. It was more than just a match. It was a proclamation. The audience still had hope for a comeback when the first set got underway. With Gauff, they always did. Her legend was her tenacity. However, there was a murmur in the air that got louder with each point. This girl, who is she? Eala's shots had become declarations by the time she broke serve for the first time. Every rally ended in disbelief, and every winner elicited gasps. She wasn't grinning or rejoicing. She was meticulous, concentrated, and locked in. The fiery and ferocious Coco Gauff appeared human all of a sudden. Additionally, the balance of women's tennis seemed to be shifting throughout that first 30 minutes. The quiet before the storm started to break. The eruption was on its way. There was just one rally at first. 41 defiant shots. Momentum is defined by this type of rally. The type that changes everything you believe to be true. Coco Gauff had just lost the serve. In an attempt to slow down the fading rhythm, she stood at the baseline and spun her racket. Alex Eala was staring at her from across the internet. No grin, no emotion. Just that continuous, unwavering heat. Gauff's signature power was evident in the first serve, which came in hard and blurred toward the corner. Deep to the backhand, Eala caught it perfectly. The back and forth, forehand, backhand, and cross-court lines followed. Neither was retreating. After every exchange, the audience gasped as the tempo increased with each shot. Then it took place. Eala moved in, saw the angle coming, and smashed a forehand down the line with such force that it painted the baseline's edge. The tension was broken by the umpire's call. Eala, game. Something shattered in the air, the audience roared, and Gauff froze. That point altered everything, not just the outcome of a game. Coco appeared uncertain for the first time during the game. Her gaze darted to her box in search of comfort. Her instructor gave a slow applaud, but it was clear from his demeanor. This was not intended to occur. Eala, meanwhile, casually made her way to her chair and took a sip of water, her expression unreadable. Commentators attempted to explain it. One said, "Maybe Gauff is adjusting." Another murmured, "Eala's playing out of her mind." However, they were unaware that this was not a fortunate run. It was a tactic. Eala had studied Gauff. She was aware of the pressure spots. She didn't always choose winners. She waited until Gauff had little room to breathe, making mistakes and tightening the angles. Mostly there for Gauff, the audience started to get agitated. When Eala's winners struck clean, there were gasps, murmurs, and even apprehensive cheers. A quick exchange at 4-1 in the first set completely altered the mood. Gauff yelled in exasperation after missing a standard backhand and slammed the ball against the net post. The arena went silent when the umpire gave a warning. Eala simply looked aside, straightened her wristband, and made her way to the baseline without responding. Because it was now psychology rather than merely skill, that moment revealed to the world who was in charge. Gauff's facial expressions all contributed to Eala's serenity. Alex grew colder the more Coco attempted to energize herself. It was a startling contrast. One player is controlling time, while the other is chasing rhythm. The subsequent games flew by. Eala's retaliations were harsh, accurate, and nearly surgical. She moved effortlessly in court. The audience was in disbelief as she broke for 5-1. People began using their phones to record what appeared to be history happening in real time. "Is this actually taking place?" A fan in the first row yelled. The story had dramatically changed by the time the first set concluded 6-1. Words like dominant, thunderous energy were increasingly being used by commentators. She was aware that the match was not yet done, yet she never once smiled. Not until the very end. Gauff attempted to reset during the second set. A few good serves, a slower tempo, and deep breathes. However, momentum is an odd concept. It is difficult for it to return after it has shifted. And the spark had already become fire in Eala's eyes. Gauff's annoyance flared up once more by the fourth game. Eala's forehand touched the edge as she questioned a line judgment. Gauff yelled, "Out." The umpire decided against it. Tension was in the air as the crowd jeered. Eala only nodded and got ready to serve once more. The illusion was totally shattered at that time. It wasn't a coincidence. This was sheer, systematic, inexorable dominance. The audience rose once more, half in shock and half in appreciation, when Eala held service with an ace down the tee. Since the young woman from Manila wasn't competing against Coco Gauff at the time, she was rewriting the story in real time, one game at a time, one comment at a time. She was playing against all the doubts that had ever been cast upon her. And it appeared as though she was winning for the first time. The atmosphere in the arena had drastically altered at the beginning of the second set. What had started out as a golf-friendly crowd had evolved into something wild, erratic, and electrifying. After each point, the sound of incredulity reverberated. The collective idea, "This can't be happening," was practically audible. Eala had already broken serve once again and was up by a set. Her self-assurance had evolved into control, which was now perilous. It was subdued domination. Every rally concluded precisely, and every movement felt deliberate. She merely turned, straightened her cap, and strolled back to the baseline without celebrating, yelling, or pumping her fist. The crowd erupted even louder because of the calmness and silence. Coco Gauff finally roared after a rare victory at 2-0. In an attempt to capitalize on the commotion, she waved her hands in the direction of the stands. The audience gave a response. Energy, chants, and cheers. They didn't flinch even when it seemed like the tide would flip for a brief period. She served wide on the very next point, dragged Gauff off the court, and ended with a crisp forehand into the open area. 9 seconds passed during the rally. The audience let out a gasp. Then one portion of the upper rows began to chant, albeit softly at first. Eala, Eala, Eala. At the stands, it became louder and realized she was no longer the only person in the crowd. The slump following each point loss. Eala responded with something sharper, quicker, and crueler each time she attempted to rally. In the middle of the game, social media started to buzz. Videos of Gauff's failed backhands and Eala's deft forehands swamped TikTok and X. This girl, who is she? One tweet was read. One more. Eala is acting as though she has something to prove, and she's doing just that. Eala's gaffe was popular by the middle of the second set. During the broadcast, shocked commentators muttered, "This is one of the most dominant performances we've seen against Coco Gauff in years." The anxiety had spread throughout the world and was no longer limited to the court. Gauff double-faulted at 4-1. She tossed back her head, clearly frustrated, as the crowd moaned. Calm as ever, Eala served once again after bouncing the ball 3 times. One more ace. 1. The crowd erupted. Some people were cheering, while others were stunned, as cameras moved across their faces. Eala's team remained silent in the player box, watching her every move with their hands folded. Before the final game, they were aware of what was about to happen. Coco Gauff is serving to keep the game going. Shouting her name and pleading for a miracle, the crowd stood up. However, Eala's homecoming was brutal. Miracles don't happen on demand. Coco battled error in a deep, hefty, and relentless manner. Point of match. Quiet. The serve arrived in the center of the box. A swirl of color and sound, Eala's forehand tore across the court. The line was cut by the ball. Excellent. Eala, game, set and match. Time appeared to stop for a moment as the words reverberated. An eruption followed. The stadium as a whole roared. With their phones raised and voices piercing the din, fans jumped out of their seats. For a little while, Eala remained motionless while gasping for air and gazing at the scoreboard. The 6th hour lasted 58 minutes. Coco Gauff approached the net and extended her hand. Eala responded to it with firmness, quiet respect, with no smirk or haughtiness. However, the flicker in Gauff's face, the annoyance concealed under her sportsmanship, was captured by the cameras. The noise followed Eala as she left the court. As if they were watching the birth of something historic, the audience yelled her name. She looked back once, not at Gauff, but at the actual event. Long after Eala had vanished down the tunnel, the sound of the crowd continued to reverberate throughout the arena following the game. Everyone felt as though they had just experienced a brief, unexpected, and unavoidable minor earthquake. With a towel covering her head, Coco Gauff sat by herself on the bench, taking in what had just transpired. For a player accustomed to mastering every beat and story, this defeat was more than simply a setback, it was unbelievable. Clips from the game quickly went viral on social media. Slow-motion replays of Eala's cross-court shots, side-by-side comparisons of their reactions, and TikTok edits of her forehands all repeatedly loop. 58 minutes was the caption that went viral. No compassion. On X, fans quickly became split. Eala was hailed by some as a future superstar who restored accuracy and bravery to women's tennis. The other described the performance as being too cold, too clinical, and even rude. Gauff supporters attempted to justify dominance because it always causes unease when it is unexpected. She appeared worn out. She's conserving energy for the upcoming occasion. But everyone knew in their hearts. It had nothing to do with exhaustion. It has to do with control. Gauff mustered a grin during her press conference following the game. She turned on the lights. Today, I was unable to find my groove. Her eyes, however, sent a different message. Close, far away, still taking in what had happened. She wasn't upset with Eala. She was upset by the helplessness that all athletes experience when their greatest efforts are insufficient. Then Eala arrived. Calm, modest, and a little taken aback by the attention. She spoke softly at first. All I did was try to play my game. Coco is someone I greatly admire. She is among the best. This score surprised me. The noise was simply made louder by that humility. Every phrase and every expression was analyzed by commentators. Did she just minimize one of the season's biggest surprises? A reporter inquired. Another said, no. She simply demonstrated maturity above her years. However, there were rumors backstage, the kind that stir up controversy. There were rumors that Gauff had left without fully addressing Eala. Some said their handshake was icy. In a brief video clip, Eala turned to face the stands and raised her hand to the audience as Gauff hurriedly left the court. It turned into a storm at that moment. Sportsmanship or shade? Is one of the headlines. After Eala's historic victory, Gauff leaves. Is a new rivalry emerging? Fans took sides, debates erupted in comment sections, and hashtags like #TrustStarTeamEala and #TrustTeamGauff concurrently trended on the internet. Analysts began posing awkward queries in the meanwhile. Was the torch being passed? Was it just one terrible day? Or was Gauff's confidence damaged? Above all, was Eala prepared for the attention she had just earned? Crowds flocked to public courts and shopping centers in Manila to celebrate. Kids wore headbands with marker-drawn AE initials. It was dubbed the greatest Filipino victory in modern tennis history by local media. Her youth coach once said, "She always said she'd beat the best one day. I simply didn't anticipate it happening that quickly." However, the outcry continued. Eala's celebration was criticized for being overly composed and for lacking emotion. Others said that by loudly applauding Eala's winners, the audience was insulting Gauff. Eala didn't react to any of it, even though it seemed like domination itself had turned into a criminal. The following day, she worked out in silence, concentrated, and unfazed. The storm outside didn't matter to her. She knew, thus the only sound that mattered to her was the ball's bounce on the court. The hype and noise would subside. However, history would remember. Like any noise, the sound ultimately subsided. The headlines changed, the memes slowed, and the flurry of opinions began to subside. However, a different kind of truth emerged in the ensuing quiet. The victory of Alex Eala wasn't a coincidence. Neither Gauff's performance nor the day were fortunate. It was the outcome of months of subdued development. A tale of obsession lay behind the cameras and the widely shared videos. Before the game, Eala's squad spent weeks studying Gauff's routines. Each serve angle, footwork rhythm, and emotional cue. They developed a patience-based technique. Coco should swing first, attack, and then counter when the opportunity arises. It was tactical genius masquerading as poise. However, belief, rather than strategy, was what really set Eala apart that evening. She didn't consider herself the underdog for the first time in her fledgling career. She entered the court expecting to win rather than hoping. Later, she told her coach in private, "I didn't play to surprise anyone. To remind myself that I belong here, I played." Because it was the crux of what spectators had seen, a player stepping into her identity, those comments would reverberate across sports media for days. To her credit, Coco Gauff dealt with the loss in the days that followed with poise. "Losses like that remind you," she remarked in a subsequent interview. "Someone is always working just as hard, if not harder, than you. It's inspiration." She grinned, but there was weight in her voice. It was resolve clothed in respect. The tone of analysts also started to change. It was dubbed the start of a new rivalry by some. Some described it as a shift in leadership. Alex Eala's name was no longer followed by an asterisk for the first time. No more potential, no more emerging star. She had made it, but every success brings with it a different kind of strain. Despite all the commotion, she managed to maintain her composure. She didn't remark on the debates or share victory speeches. Rather, she sent a single message on social media: "Thank you for believing." There was still more work to be done. Easy, modest, yet strong. Because there was more to that 58-minute devastation than just dominance. It was a change. The invisible boundary between potential and power has been crossed by Eala. Who is she from? How far is she capable of going? One thing became evident as the tennis community continued to conjecture. The spectacular match wasn't the conclusion of a tale. It marked the start of a legacy. Even after several weeks, people continued to discuss it. The shock lasted 58 minutes. What had started out as a standard tournament encounter had become an amazing encounter. The kind of performance that changes a sport's unspoken rules. That night was more than just a triumph for Eala. It was an identity change. She was the underdog when she entered that court. And left as a symbol. Suddenly, every young athlete from Manila to Madrid had a new moniker attached to their aspirations. She had become evidence that strength can come from anywhere, that faith can transcend boundaries, and that tennis isn't only for the select few. Coco Gauff also contributed to the strength of the narrative. The loss did not cause her to vanish or fall apart. Rather, she welcomed it and turned it into fuel. She gave a straightforward answer when questioned about Eala weeks later. That girl is unique. When we get together again, I'll be prepared. There was only resolve, two pathways that would inevitably intersect again, instead of resentment. The game was dubbed the Manila Miracle by sports historians. The statistics were continuously analyzed by analysts. 18 winners, 4 aces, and just 6 unforced errors in 58 minutes. However, the events of that evening could not be adequately described by numbers alone. Because Eala's actions were motivated by more than just execution. She entered without fear and left a lasting impression. Every sport has a turning point where time is divided into before and after. Eala was a prospect before to this game. She was a presence after that. She had written a new story, one that was all her own. But despite all the commotion and media attention, she remained unchanged. Quiet purpose, no self-congratulations, no spectacular interviews. Days later, she answered a young fan's question on how she maintained her composure under pressure at a local event. Because my entire life, I've already been undervalued. What is there to be afraid of? Not because it was loud, but because it was true. That line became viral once more. Eala had transformed humility into strength and undervaluation into fuel. The legacy of that evening is still being written. The world's realization that greatness doesn't always reveal itself is a recurring theme in every highlight reel, replay, and argument. Occasionally, it enters silently, seizes control, and leaves everyone speechless. Perhaps this explains why supporters continue to get chills while watching that game. Because of what it represented, not because of the score. It was more than a mere 58-minute devastation. It was the beginning of faith. Careers are defined by some moments, while periods are defined by others. Was this only an upset, or was it the start of a new rivalry that would influence women's tennis going forward? Please share your thoughts in the comment section. Click like, subscribe, and stay tuned if that 58-minute lesson gave you shivers. Because the next eruption in this sport could occur at any time.